Good afternoon. Let me start by thanking President Macron for bringing us together today. Between the two of us, we've now convened 4 of these meetings in either London or Paris. And it's now, obviously, over 2 weeks since Ukraine agreed to an immediate 30-day ceasefire. That offer is still unanswered. It's over a week since Putin agreed to an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, but since then, Russia has hit energy infrastructure in cities across Ukraine. They've increased their bombardment, firing over 1,000 long-range drones at the country, hitting Ukrainian homes, schools and hospitals, with widespread civilian casualties. One drone killed a mother, a father and their daughter, an innocent family. Then this week we saw the agreement on a ceasefire in the Black Sea. I welcomed this as a vital first step forward, but within a few minutes of the announcement, Russia set out new conditions and delays. Now, President Trump has rightly called them out for dragging their feet. And we agreed here in Paris today that it's clear the Russians are filibustering. They are playing games and they're playing for time. It is a classic from the Putin playbook. But we can't let them drag this out while they continue prosecuting their illegal invasion. Instead, we should be setting a framework and a deadline of delivering real progress. And then we should hold them to that deadline. So here in Paris, we've agreed that we must go further now to support the peace process, support Ukraine, and increase the pressure on Russia to get serious. That means, first, stepping up the military pressure. So the Defence Secretary will chair the next Ukraine Defence Contact Group on the 11th of April to marshal more military aid and keep Ukraine in the fight. Because peace comes through strength. That was one of the main messages reasserted today and emphasised today all around the table and the meeting. Second, it means increasing the economic pressure on Russia, accelerating new, tougher sanctions, bearing down on Russia's energy revenues, and working together to make this pressure count. We also discussed how we can support the implementation of a full or partial ceasefire when it is in place, and how we can build on efforts towards negotiations on a just and lasting peace. That remains our shared goal, and it's what the coalition of the willing is designed to support. The political will from partners here today was clear. And this week in London, we hosted over 200 military planners from 30 countries, coming forward with contributions on everything from logistics and command and control to deployments on land, on air and on sea. That work continues at pace. We will be ready to operationalise a peace deal whenever its precise shape turns out to be. And we will work together to ensure Ukraine's security so it can defend and deter against future attacks. This is Europe mobilising together behind the peace process on a scale that we haven't seen for decades. Backed by partners from around the world, we are determined to deliver a just and lasting peace, because we know that it is vital for Ukraine and Europe as a whole. And I am clear that it's also vital for Britain. Thank you. I will now take some questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Adam Parsons from Sky News. You talked there about political unity. Senior figures in the American administration have described European leaders, presumably including yourself, as pathetic freeloaders. How can you possibly rely on the Trump administration to craft a ceasefire that works for Europe and for Ukraine? And if they do create that, if there is a ceasefire, how will you enforce it and monitor it? And will you commit now to putting British troops on the ground in Ukraine to keep that country safe?
Well, let me begin answering that by describing the mood in the room today in the meeting, because we had 30 countries represented, obviously NATO and the EU as well, and there was a broad consensus that this group of nations is now stronger and broader than it's ever been. And so there was clearly a mood of that strength, a word that was used throughout the meeting. In terms of the military operational planning, that sits alongside the political momentum. So today and these meetings that Emmanuel Macron and I are hosting, that's the political momentum. Alongside that is the planning that's going on. It went on intensely in London this week, 3 extra days concluding today. And the chiefs of defence will now, as a result of today, the UK and the French and the German chiefs of defence will meet in Ukraine with their counterparts to take forward, as it were, with Ukraine, how those plans or options are going to be implemented. Obviously, we don't know yet whether there'll be a deal, what exactly the deal will be like, and therefore, politically, what we're requiring is options that are credible, that can be operationalised. But the chiefs of defence will now go and have that discussion, not least because the military and operational coalition, if you like, is designed to build on the Ukrainian capability, not sort of an alternative to it. So that's where we're at. As I've always said, this will require the engagement and support of the United States. That's a discussion we've had with the US, with the President, on many occasions. But I would describe the mood as a group of countries coming together more resolute today and stronger and broader than they've been in the weeks that this has been developing as a group. Thank you very much. Harry, ITV.
Thank you very much. Harry Horton, ITV News. It's almost been a month since the first meeting of this coalition of the willing. And as you say, the fighting in Ukraine continues. It still seems as though the UK and France are the only countries publicly committing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine. And the US has still not committed to this security guarantee. What evidence have you got of any real progress that this coalition of the willing is making? And just if I may, you talked about setting a deadline. For what? And what happens if that deadline isn't met?
Well, let me take both parts of that. Firstly, on the progress, clearly there has been progress in terms of the numbers and the intent of the group and that sense of it being now a stronger and broader group brought together. And Emmanuel and I have now hosted, as I say, 4 meetings to bring this group together. And the mood today was very much a clear and resolute mood about the strength that comes from working together in this collective way. And of course, this is not a EU grouping. It's a broader grouping than that is now operating in this way. On the progress we've made, I mean, the planning, I went to see the planning myself on Thursday of last week. We had 200 planners in London in our own headquarters, split into groups that were dealing with the optionality when it comes to land, to sea and air, and now obviously the development of that through the Chiefs of Defence going to Ukraine. Yes, it's optionality. Nobody knows whether there'll be a deal or what the shape of it will be. But there's clearly been political progress in the sense of momentum, if you like, in the political group that we've been able to put together, which is significant in its own right, because there was a feeling around the table that Europe, taking Europe as a whole, has not been this strong and united for a very long time, and that was clearly the mood in the room. But in the operational planning that goes with it, I'm so sorry, Harry. The second bit of your question.
You said there was a deadline.
Oh, sorry.
What is the deadline?
Yeah. So the point here is, as it were, a preliminary point to a deal, which is our collective view is that Russia is playing games, that Putin is back to his old playbook, and therefore the pressure needs to go on to Russia to get more seriously to the negotiating table and to have a framework or a deadline, if you like, for responding to what the Ukrainians have already put on the table and what the US is seeking to achieve in their initiative. So I think there's got to be a framework around that. Obviously, we'll discuss that with allies and with the US, but also, and this was a very strong resolve across the room, that now is not the time for pulling back or weakening on sanctions. On the contrary, now is the time for increasing sanctions on Russia to get them to the table to these negotiations to the hope of a ceasefire and a lasting and secure ceasefire that preserves the security and sovereignty of Ukraine. So that's as it were, the other element of the meeting today. So up until now, very much a focus on how do we defend a deal if we get there. Today, an equal emphasis, I would say, on how do we collectively, as a pretty large group of nations, ensure that we put pressure on the Russians to get to the table, to actually negotiate, and be really clear that they are filibustering, they are delaying, and we've seen this playbook before. Look, I mean, we in the mood for deadlines. I don't want to put a hard deadline on this, but we need to see this developing in days and weeks, not months and months, and we need to move on to that space. But I mean, so I'd say today was that came up, as it were, alongside what we need to do if there is a deal, as part of the big discussion that we had over quite a session this morning. Jeremy from the BBC.
Thanks. Thank you, Prime Minister. You seem to be describing a very different world or different view of the war to the one that President Trump tells us about. I mean, this is all happening, isn't it? This talk of ceasefires because of President Trump's, first of all, his assertion during the campaign that he could sort it all out in a day. Then it was going to be 100 days. He was a great deal maker. That actually there is a reality here that neither side believed there could be a ceasefire, neither Ukraine nor Russia, that President Putin has made it clear on multiple occasions that actually his view of what should happen is not a ceasefire, but it is either victory through capitulation of Ukraine or victory on the battlefield. Isn't it time, in fact, to actually say, this isn't going to work? We shouldn't be going for a ceasefire. We should be going for something else, maybe more military support for Ukraine that will enable them to make progress on that battle.
No, I don't agree with that. I think that President Trump absolutely clearly wants a lasting peace in Ukraine, and that's directing all of his actions. And in a matter of weeks, he has got both sides, as it were, to a negotiating table, and we've made some progress. Ukraine has clearly put forward 2 weeks ago now its proposal in relation to a ceasefire. What we now need to do, in my view, is increase the pressure on Russia to get to that proposal on a ceasefire, to meet it and to match it as a first step towards a lasting peace. And I think that's the right course, and that's why we are supporting the US in this endeavour. And that is amongst the things we discussed this morning. And at the same time, we have to answer the question, if there's a deal this time, why will it hold in the way that the deals in the past have not held? Because this wouldn't be the first time that a deal has been reached. But what we need to make sure is it's the last time that a deal is reached and not breached and is held to. So that's why we're focusing on pushing forward and put pressure on Russia and answering the question, how would you defend a deal if a deal is in place? And I genuinely believe that is the right course. Everybody wants lasting peace. Everyone wants a negotiated settlement, not least the Ukrainians. They've been subjected to this illegal invasion for over 3 years now. They've been incredibly resilient. Zelensky has led from the front, in my view, over all of those 3 years. And he's now leading from the front again in relation to these ceasefire discussions. Thank you.
Follow up on that, Prime Minister. What makes you so certain, then, that there is a way of persuading President Putin to give up his long-held and very publicly discussed views on the future of Ukraine, which he believes should effectively be part of Russia?
Well, nobody could stand here and I'm not going to say with great certainty, by date X, we will have got to this point. What I am saying is that this is a process. I believe the goal is the right goal, which is a lasting peace in Ukraine that secures the security and sovereignty of Ukraine. I am not alone in that view, because that is the President Trump's view. It's clearly the view of a group of countries now that we've put together, 30 countries, openly saying amongst themselves this morning that this is the strongest they've seen Europe in a very long time. And they mean Europe and not institutions within Europe. And it is, of course, the view of Ukraine. So I can't stand here with certainty and say, yes, I know exactly what the outcome will be on what day. What I do know is that that politically, if we can provide that leadership, backed up by operational plans, then that is the best chance, in my view, of achieving the outcome that we all want. Chris, GB News.
Chris Hope, GB News. Prime Minister, Russia's today warning of a direct conflict with NATO if your coalition, the Willing, puts troops on the ground in Ukraine. Will you give MPs a vote on your plans before that happens? If I can quickly ask about the spring statement yesterday, you told us that we'll be £500 better off from the spring statement, but just next week, energy bills go up, council tax bills go up, water bills, broadband bills, TV licence, rail fares go up, plus national insurance for employers, plus fees of income tax thresholds. £500 won't touch the sides of what's facing your voters next week. Are you gaslighting them? And what's your message to them about the cost of living crisis?
Let me take I think ended up being three parts of your question, Chris, but fair enough. Look, in terms of what Russia says, we know what Russia wants. It wants a defenceless Ukraine. So it doesn't surprise me that Russia's saying their position is Ukraine shouldn't have any capability of its own or any assistance or help from anybody else. That rather gives away their opening stance on this, and that can't guide us in our response. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves with a vote because we're not at that stage. We are at the stage of turning the political momentum into operational plans, looking at the various options, and then going for the next piece of work with the Chiefs of Defence. But you know my long-standing position, which is if we were to deploy in any scenario on a long-term basis, then of course Parliament should have a say in that, and I don't deflect from that. Look, on the people being £500 better off, it's not me saying that, it's the OBR. And that is really important because we said that we would improve living standards under a Labour government, and that is what the OBR says we are doing. And obviously their calculation takes into account other factors. That is materially different to the last 14 years. If there's one thing above all else that singles out the last 14 years under the Tory government, it's that it was the biggest downgrading and reduction in living standards in generations. So that is really important. And of course, alongside that, interest rates are coming down. If people are on mortgages, that makes a material difference. Wages are up higher than prices. So in terms of what people feel in their pockets, that's a really important measure. And of course, for those on the lowest income, that's 3 million people, they will have that hike in the minimum wage. So what we're doing is, in answer to your question, securing our economy, taking the decisions that are necessary, seeing that impacted in the OBR's assessment that people will be £500 better off, so living standards will go up, very important. But at the same time, because of the investment we made in the NHS and others, we've seen 2 million additional appointments in the NHS. We said we would do that in the first year of a Labour government. We've done it in 7 months. For 5 months, waiting lists have come down, even during the winter. So I think we can be clear that the decisions we made in the budget were the right decisions. They were tough, but they were right, and you can see now some of the effects of them. Thank you very much, Chris. I've got Ulysses, I think, next.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier Ministre.
Bonjour.
French television, BFM TV. Emmanuel Macron just said that you are going to co-pilot the military support for Ukraine, and you announced that there will be a mission in Ukraine with the British and French Minister, maybe of Defense. So are you the co-pilots with Emmanuel Macron of what's being done to reassure Ukraine of the support of the European nation? And also, Emmanuel Macron this morning again explained how he sees this force of reassurance, this European force. So how would you describe this force? What is it going to do if it happens? Macron spoke about, sending troops around big cities and around military bases, strategic bases. How many military do you see joining this force, and how many countries would participate? Thank you.
Well, this morning the group of countries asked Emmanuel and me to sort of lead the coordination of the efforts that we have touched on this morning. Now, that is obviously something we do in conjunction with and in liaising with all of our partners at every level. But it's really just to take that effort forward and then to take it into the next stages, the Chief of Defence meeting that will be happening in Ukraine, and to ensure that we keep the momentum going in the group that we've been able to put together. But let me just be really clear. This is a group of countries that are coming together in this way because each and every country represented, each and every leader is taking that leadership role at a crucial moment.